You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 46 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. We just saw the completion of day, 10, 11, I don't know what day we're up to in the NBA playoffs. But we had 4 games today. So let's get right into it and talk about the Utah Jazz versus the Oklahoma City Thunder in Game 3. And it's impossible to talk about this game without acknowledging the atmosphere in Utah. Man, I was watching this on the other side of the world and I could feel the atmosphere. It was incredible. And Utah came out strong, which wasn't surprising when you consider, as I said, the crowd and the atmosphere. But to the Thunder's credit, they responded behind Westbrook, George, and Anthony, which was really the first time we've seen all three of these guys play well together. And they finished the first quarter on an 18-2 run, and they were the ones to take a lead into the second quarter. Foul trouble once again plagued Steven Adams, and like I mentioned in previous shows, that causes all kinds of problems for Oklahoma on both sides of the ball. And what makes this series so intriguing to me is the contrast in styles. Oklahoma's strength is perimeter players that are capable of doing everything on the court, whilst Utah has players that have very specific roles, and they don't stray far from their strategy. They just keep coming at their opponents, and against an enigmatic team like the Thunder, that causes all kinds of pressure. The matchup at point guard is also fascinating. The first quarter was all West, but Rubio took over in the second quarter and turned the game and perhaps the series right on its head. I spoke in a previous episode about Westbrook needing to put the defensive clamps on him, but he had 20 points in the second quarter alone. Westbrook really needs to take that assignment seriously, because Rubio is showing the ability to control games and dominate games and to swing them in favor of Utah. If he's able to get into that kind of rhythm, they're in all kinds of trouble, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to talk about what happened in the second quarter a little bit more. Utah finished the quarter on a 25-8 run, and there were similarities, to the 18-2 run by the Thunder at the end of the first. This game of runs continued in the second half, with the Thunder starting off well in the third quarter, but predictably Utah responded. Expect the rhythm of both teams to only get better as the series goes on, and that's because either team is capable of going on huge runs, and no lead is really safe. Now, you might be thinking, what am I talking about here? Utah just completely blew them out in the fourth quarter, and if you only saw the fourth quarter, if you only saw this one game, feel justified in questioning that. But if you've watched any Oklahoma basketball this year, they go on runs. As I mentioned before, they are an enigma of a team, and they are likely to go on an 18-2, 18-4, 20-6 run and get themselves back in any game, or they're likely to give that up on the other end as well. And Utah is more than capable, as we've seen, to ongoing those runs themselves. This game is also a good example of why it's sometimes better to lose by a lot in the NBA playoffs in a single game than only a few points, because it really exposed some of the problems and issues that Oklahoma need to fix up if they hope of not just advancing this series, but if they plan on getting past Houston or getting to the NBA Finals. The first is, it looks to me at least, that Russell Westbrook is still in regular season mode. And granted, Russell Westbrook in regular season mode in terms of intensity is usually better than a lot of people's or players' playoff intensity. But as I said before, if this team is to have expectations of getting past Utah or going further in the playoffs, Russell Westbrook has to lead them. And if Ricky Rubio is getting more production than Westbrook, it's pretty much over. And when you combine that with Joe Ingles getting more than Paul George, look, there's little wonder that the result was a blowout loss. So it goes without saying that needs to stop. I also want to see Oklahoma get into transition a little more. They seem happy with settling for a half-court game, but the Jazz are very comfortable in that style. Whenever Westbrook has a rebound, or when he has the ball for that matter, he needs to push. If Utah gets back, just pull it out and you can set up the offense. And the final thing is, when Carmelo Anthony is actually feeling it, they need to get him the ball, especially if Favors is guarding him. Throughout 3 quarters, Melo was 6 from 8 from the field, and they couldn't get him the ball. And I know he's not the scorer that he was 5, 6, 7 years ago, but still, if he's got the hot hand, ride that hot hand. Not looking for him or not running plays for him in that situation is completely unacceptable. The worst part about all that is when he's struggling, they look for him more. So think about that. When Carmelo is struggling from the field, they get him more looks. When he's going well, they don't even run plays for him. Now, a lot of that has to do with the defense also allowing him to get the ball, but just run some screens for him, get him on the low block, and especially if Favors is on him, Favors can't deny him the ball on the perimeter. Now, if you're Utah, obviously there's no real changes. If I was the Jazz, I would wait and see what, if any, counter Oklahoma has, and then respond. The only thing that would really worry me at this stage if I was Utah is if their perimeter shots start falling big time like they were in game 1. But they've already made that counter and they press up on the perimeter players a lot more now. So perhaps if we see the perimeter players of Oklahoma getting to the front of the rim a little bit more, and that opening up some rebounding situations for Adams or Patterson or Grant. But beyond that, all the pressure is on Oklahoma to respond. And if they go down 3-1, I'm not sure if they can get out of that situation with the way Utah is playing right now. And speaking of 3-1, Philly versus Miami. Wow, this series, man, I wish this series could go on forever. I wish we could get 82 games of this. Well, not 82 because you need an odd number, but 81 games or 83 games. And Game 4 lived up to all the expectations, and we were treated to another playoff beauty. And during Philly's ascension to an elite team in the NBA, we have all marveled at how well their offense has flowed. But in this game, their offense was horrible. They only shot 43% and 22% from three-point territory, and they had 26 turnovers, and they still won. Plus, it was on the road. Forget the quote-unquote team of the future claims, because they just might be the team of right now, not the future. And if you think I'm overreacting, who in the Eastern Conference should Philadelphia be worried about right now? Especially with the way the Cavs are playing up against Indiana. Who would you be worried about? If you're the Philadelphia 76ers, and if you dare to look ahead, who would you be concerned with? Boston? Milwaukee? Toronto? I wouldn't be worried about any of those teams. But getting back to this game was won by Philly on the glass with 57 rebounds, and they showed the type of killer instinct in the fourth quarter that is needed to go deep into the playoffs. Ben Simmons finished with a triple-double, and Wade scored 25 points. Unlike in Game 2, however, Philly was able to withstand the late push by the Heat, and Redick's shot in the final 30 seconds sealed it up for them. Now, although they're up 3-1 and have 2 games at home left in this series, the toughest game of a series is usually the closing out team, like we saw in the Blazers-Pelican game, which I'll get to in a minute. I had questions, though, leading into this series about Philly's resolve, but after winning both games in Miami, I think they take care of business in Game 5, especially the way that Embiid and Simmons are controlling the flow of the game. Now, I just mentioned the Blazers and Pelicans game, so I may as well talk about that now. And the fight and intensity from Portland, where was that in Game 3? Can I ask that? Because if they had that kind of a performance in Game 3, they probably would have won Game 3. CJ McCollum led the way for the Blazers with 38, and the Blazers starters combined for an incredible 117 points. I saw that in the box score. I was like, whoa, 117 points, and they still lost. But anyway, for the first time in the series, the Pelicans' offense carried them and compensated for their lack of defense. Anthony Davis poured in 47 and Holiday had 41. Let me repeat that. Anthony Davis scored 47 and Drew Holiday had 41. This is the first time since Irving and LeBron both scored 40 in Game 5 of the 2016 finals, which was fairly recent. But before that, and I didn't look this up, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time that was the first time since the 95 playoffs when Drexler and Olajuwon, when they scored 40 in a decisive Game 5. Remember, it was the best out of 5, and that was against Utah. So this is a rare feat. Down the stretch, Portland looked to be on the verge of stealing the game, but they just couldn't get the lead. I think a lot of us, especially after Game 3, expected a blowout, but the Pelicans showed a great poise and resolve down the stretch when they were matching the desperation of a Portland team looking to stay alive. This is the kind of victory that is much more beneficial moving forward than another blowout win. Damian Lillard had another shocker to cap a terrible playoff run, and he finished the series with 18.5 points per game and 4 turnovers per game with only 4.8 assists per game. So his assist-to-turnover ratio was even worse than his shooting percentage. His regular season production was 27 points per game with 6.6 assists per game and only 2.8 turnovers per game. The New Orleans defense will be tested against Golden State, but they've already proven how capable they actually are. In my opinion, this game stamped Anthony Davis as the clear second best player in the NBA, behind only James Harden. In fact, since Cousins' injury, I would argue that Davis has played better than Harden. Harden, of course, will be the MVP, and rightly so, because he's been consistent all season. But nobody is playing better than Davis right now. And that leaves us with the Rockets and Timberwolves. And just like the Raptors versus Wizards game, the Rockets stumbled in their first road game. The Timberwolves' balance was great, with 4 of their starters combining for 89 points. So that's Towns, Teague, Wiggins, and Butler. Minnesota also got a huge lift from Derrick Rose, who played great for them off the bench. And for the second game this series, Chris Paul struggled getting into a rhythm offensively and had 6 turnovers along with only 6 assists. In a reversal of roles, however, it was Capella and not Karl Anthony Towns who emerged as a non-factor. In all honesty though, Game 4 will determine the significance of Game 3. If the Rockets win Game 4, this will go down as merely a speed hump in their playoff run. If Minnesota wins and Houston struggles to get their role players to produce, anything could happen in that situation. And Minnesota proved today that they absolutely have the talent to compete with Houston. And the pressure was now on the Rockets to respond. But I really wouldn't read too much into this game the same way I wouldn't read too much into the Raptors and Wizards Game 3. Okay, so we got through those games kind of quickly, so I actually have some time now to respond to some questions. And I got a really good one via email the other day, and it was in response to what I was saying about Portland needing to get an additional star player, especially on the offensive end, to take some of the burden off Damian Lillard and provide some versatility. And the question was asking me not who do I think would fit in alongside Damian Lillard, but who I could see having the potential in becoming available as a veteran player to fit in. And I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, what about Kevin Love? Because you think about it, right? If LeBron leaves, as we're all expecting him to do, regardless of what happens, if he leaves and goes to wherever, plays for the Monstars, for example, what do the Cavs do with Kevin Love? Are they happy with winning 30, 35, 40 games with Kevin Love and the way this team is currently constructed, and then building around whoever they draft? Or do they try to offload Kevin Love and get some additional young players? And Portland has some young players, for example. So I think Kevin Love would be perfect for him, because what Portland struggles in doing, and I talked about this before, is we saw New Orleans really expose them because they were jumping the screen and roll or high screens and the ball handles, especially if Damian Lillard had it. Now, that's not the first time we've seen teams do this to Portland. I referenced the series against the Clippers when they were doing it with DeAndre Jordan. And the way that they countered it, the Blazers countered it, was one, Blake Griffin and Chris Paul got injured. And 2, they would get the ball to Mason Plumlee, even if he was 20 feet out, and they would allow him to drive with the basketball and either dish to the corners for wide open shots or finish it with a dunk himself. Now, if you put Kevin Love in that situation, first of all, teams are not going to be able to jump on that pick and roll or that screen, because you throw it to Kevin Love and he has the ability to knock down that shot. Or he has the passing, he's not going to drive and dunk it, but he doesn't need to drive and dunk it. But he can also make a standstill precision pass to either cutters or shooters around him. And I think he could run that with either CJ McCollum or Damian Lillard. And I don't think you would have to give up either of those guys, obviously, because I don't think you would if you're Portland. And in that circumstance, I think Kevin Love would be a fantastic fit to play in that system. Now, of course, all of this is reliant on if LeBron leaves. If LeBron stays, which I highly doubt, but if he stays, then of course they're not moving Kevin Love. He's gonna, if LeBron James stays in Cleveland, Kevin Love will finish his career playing alongside LeBron James. And if Portland is unable to pick up a player of Kevin Love's caliber to play that position, then they've got to really take a long, hard look at whether they should blow this team up and actually trade Lillard or McCollum or whoever. Because the way that this team is currently constructed, as I said in the previous podcast, they have got no chance at taking out good teams that don't get injured in the playoffs. That's their only chance. If the players get injured or they get superstar performances or Hall of Fame performances from LaMarcus Aldridge and Damian Lillard in one series, and they barely get over the line against the Houston Rockets, which is what happened in 2015. Or no, 2014, sorry. That's what it takes. And if that's what it takes, then you really, I mean, all you've got is a puncher's chance at that stage. And if you think about it, okay, you might win one playoff series, but are you going to make it to the conference finals? Are you going to make it to the NBA finals? No, that's not going to happen. You may win one series, but that's it. Still have time for one more question, and I thought this was a little bit of an unusual one, but I'm going to throw it in there because nobody's talking about the Knicks at this point of the year. They usually don't. But the question was asking me, at what point do the Knicks give up on Porzingis? If they can't surround him with enough talent, what point will they give up and actually trade Porzingis? And they don't. They don't give up on Porzingis. He's the only thing that's really keeping this team competitive in the Eastern Conference. And isn't it funny? I don't want to go on a big rant here, but I'll try to sum it up as quickly as I can. But isn't it funny that Phil Jackson was treated so badly in New York by the media, local and national and international, for the job he did in New York? But his defining moment of the Knicks was drafting Porzingis. And that's not an easy draft pick. That was not an easy draft pick, by the way. That wasn't like drafting Patrick Ewing with the number one pick or LeBron James with the number one pick. He was crucified until Porzingis started showing signs of his talent for that draft pick at the number 4 spot. So that was a great draft pick. One of the great ones in the last 10 years, at least. And despite that, the perception of Phil Jackson is that he ruined the Knicks. But the defining moment of him, or the defining piece that he brought to that franchise, is completely untouchable. If Phil Jackson was such a terrible vice president of basketball operations, or president of basketball operations, I can't remember what his title was, but if he was so bad at his job, why is it that his one holdover is completely untouchable? Just think about that for a second. Because it really does go and fly in the face of everybody that said he did a terrible job. I don't think he did a terrible job. And Porzingis, obviously, is one of the top, at least 5, maybe even higher, players in terms of trade value in the NBA, just based off his potential and what he actually brings to the table. There aren't a whole lot of players that you would trade straight up for Porzingis. I wouldn't trade LeBron for him at this stage of his career. Giannis is one that you would definitely look into. Maybe Harden. I'm not sure if you would trade for Westbrook. I mean, name value alone, you would be tempted to. But, who would you go beyond that? Maybe Durant. But even then, that's not a guarantee. Maybe Ben Simmons. Maybe Embiid. But there's not a whole lot. Maybe a little bit more than 5. But these are only players that you would seriously consider. Not straight away, yes, I will trade you Giannis for Porzingis. There's just not a whole lot of players. And that's the point I wanted to make is Porzingis is untouchable, and he's a carryover from the Phil Jackson, and Phil Jackson brought him in, really put his neck out on the line immediately by bringing him in. And people want to say he did a terrible job. Look, that New York franchise is toxic, and not even Phil Jackson could survive it. So if you're a Knicks fan and you're blaming Phil Jackson, I know I'm going a little bit off topic here, but if you're still blaming or harboring resentment towards Phil Jackson, how much better has your franchise gotten without Phil Jackson? And how much better was it prior to Phil Jackson? And the only hope you have is the fact that you have Porzingis to build around. Anyway, guys, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening. We will have another pod tomorrow because we have 4 more games tomorrow. And let's have a look at those games. I actually wrote them out this time. I didn't forget about it. So the Celtics versus Bucks. I got the Bucks winning at home, tying the series at 2. Warriors at Spurs. Warriors close that out and sweep the Spurs. Raptors at Wizards. I got the Raptors winning and going up 3-1. And the Cavs at Pacers. Look, I've been all over the place with my predictions, but I will put money that the Cavs win this game. If they go down 3-1 in that series, even if they get out of it, they are done in the second round. Because if this is the levels of execution and energy levels that they're going to show in Game 1 and Game 3 of a first round series, how are they going to go up against much superior competition such as the Raptors in the second round after getting through a 7-game war where they had to come back from 3 games to 1? I don't buy it for a second. So they must get this game if they have any hope of doing anything significant in the NBA playoffs. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, guys, and I'll catch up with you in the next podcast tomorrow.